I used to think that being alone was the safest place a person could be. After all, nobody can hurt you if they can't reach you. Nobody can surprise you if there's no one else around. For years, I believed that. I built my routines around it, guarded my space like it was a vault, and avoided the chaos of people as if that alone could keep me whole. But if you stay alone long enough, you learn something unpleasant. It's not always other people who break the silence. Sometimes the silence itself cracks. Sometimes it lets things in. My name's Michael Harlow. I'm a wildlife photographer. I make my living crouching in the brush, waiting for hours to capture the right frame of a hawk's wings or the quick dart of a fox. It's quiet work, and for a while it was exactly what I needed. The winter of 2021, though, was different. A year earlier, my wife Emily had left me. We'd been married 11 years. She said I'd changed after the burglary, that I'd stopped sleeping, stopped laughing, started checking the lock so often it felt like I was keeping her prisoner too. She wasn't wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was always just about to happen. My therapist told me I should try a change of scenery, somewhere away from my apartment, my routines, my fears. Go where the only thing you'll hear at night is the wind, she said. Nature has a way of untangling the knots in us. That's how I ended up signing a 4-week lease for a house at the end of a winding road in Asheville, North Carolina. The address was 56 Birch Hollow. Fully furnished, quiet as a tomb, and surrounded by bare winter trees that rattled like dry bones when the wind picked up. I told myself this was therapy. A month to photograph birds, walk the trails, and maybe, just maybe, remember what it felt like to breathe without listening for footsteps. The first day passed easily. I unpacked, set up my camera gear on the back porch, and spent hours with a cup of coffee in hand, snapping photos of chickadees and cardinals picking at the feeder. By the time the sun went down, I almost believed I'd made the right choice. That changed at 9:47 p.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing photos on my laptop when I heard a sound from upstairs, a slow, deliberate creak, like weight shifting on old floorboards. I froze, listening. The landlord had told me I'd be the only one here. No neighbors close enough to wander in, no shared walls. Probably the house settling, I muttered to myself. But the words didn't quite stick. I grabbed my flashlight and made a slow circuit of the upstairs rooms. Empty, nothing out of place. I told myself again it was just the cold tightening the wood, but I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. The next morning I noticed something odd. I was making coffee when my socks picked up dampness from the hallway floor. I looked down. Muddy footprints. Small ones, not mine. Barefoot, maybe a child's size. They started near the base of the stairs and ended halfway to the guest bedroom. I took photos of them on my phone, intending to send them to the landlord, but every time I tried to attach them, the upload failed with some error code I'd never seen. Eventually I gave up, cleaned the floor, and tried to forget about it. But that day marked the start of other disturbances. Little things at first. A framed photograph in the living room turned face down overnight. My camera tripod, which I'd left beside the couch, appeared 3 feet closer to the hallway the next morning. A glass I'd left in the sink ended up neatly drying on the rack. I told myself it was me, distracted, maybe moving things without thinking. But by the third night, my grip on that explanation was thin. A winter storm rolled in after dark. Power flickered, and the house seemed to shrink in the cold. Around 11:12 p.m., I heard a soft tapping from the guest bedroom, steady like fingernails brushing glass. I padded down the hallway, flashlight in hand. The room was empty, window locked. I was turning to leave when something caught my eye in the mirror at the end of the hall. A small figure stood in the guest bedroom doorway behind me, pale, motionless, watching. I spun around. The doorway was empty. Sleep was out of the question after that. I sat up until dawn, the flashlight on the table beside me, every light in the house burning. The following morning, I set up my motion-activated wildlife camera in the hallway outside the guest bedroom. The night vision would pick up anything moving after dark. It was the same setup I'd used dozens of times in the field, good enough to catch a fox slipping through the shadows. When I checked the footage the next day, my hands went cold. At 3:08 a.m., the guest bedroom door opened slowly. A thin, pale figure stepped into the hallway. The proportions were wrong for an adult. Too slight, too short. It stopped, turned its head toward my closed bedroom door, and then in the space between two frames it vanished. I called the landlord. My voice was steady at first, but it started to crack as I described what I'd seen. He was quiet for a long moment before saying, "You probably should have been told this before. The house used to belong to a family. Their son went missing in '98, never found. That room was his." I asked him if he was serious. He said he was. Penalty. "If you're uncomfortable, you can leave early." No, I told him I'd think about it, but deep down I already knew I wasn't leaving. Not yet. By the time the sun went down that night, I'd made up my mind. If I ran now, I'd never stop wondering. I'd go back to Asheville, crawl into bed, and replay that hallway footage over and over, asking myself if it was a trick of the light, a glitch, or something worse. I'd had enough of running after the break-in. Maybe it was stupid, maybe it was dangerous, but I wasn't leaving until I understood what I was dealing with. Still, my nerves weren't made of steel. Before it got fully dark, I locked every window, deadbolted both doors, and pushed the dining chair under the knob of the guest bedroom. I even slid a heavy suitcase in front of it just in case. The rest of the evening was uneventful, though uneventful in that house felt like waiting for a bomb to go off. Every gust of wind rattled the siding like knuckles on a door. The occasional flicker of power made the shadows stretch and twist. I kept the wildlife camera in place, facing the guest bedroom door. Sometime after midnight, I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. I woke to the sound of wood scraping on wood. It took a few seconds to place it. The chair. It was sliding across the floor. I sat up, heart pounding. My phone said 2:57 a.m. The sound stopped. I grabbed the flashlight, flipped it on, and stepped into the hallway. The guest bedroom door was wide open. The chair was back by the dining table. I felt my hands go clammy on the flashlight. I'd braced myself for something standing in that doorway. A man, a child, anything. But there was only darkness inside. The next morning, I reviewed the camera footage. At 2:55, the door handle began to turn, slowly. No hand on it, no visible force. At 2:56, the door eased open, the chair slid aside, and the camera fizzled into static until 3:02. When the picture came back, the door was open and the hallway empty. I wanted answers. The landlord had been reluctant before, but I called him again. "You didn't tell me everything," I said. "Mr. Harlow," he replied, "it out short term for a reason. What's in that house doesn't bother anyone who leaves it alone. I rent, that's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." His tone ended the conversation. That day I started leaving a voice recorder running in the hallway. I also set my tripod camera to take still photos every 30 seconds between midnight and 4 a.m. The first night, the recorder picked up nothing but the hum of the refrigerator. The second night was different. At 1:43 a.m., a faint knocking started on the recorder. Irregular, like someone gently tapping a wall from inside. It went on for almost 3 minutes. At 2:10, there was a whisper. Too soft to make out words, but definitely a voice. The photos were stranger. 2 were just black, as if the lens cap had been on, but I hadn't touched it. In the third, the hallway was empty except for a pale blur near the guest bedroom door. The blur had a shape to it, a suggestion of shoulders, a head tilted slightly to one side. By the fourth night, I was starting to feel like I wasn't alone even in daylight. I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye while making coffee. My tripod would be a few inches off from where I'd left it. A throw blanket folded on the couch would be draped over the armrest instead. I was tired, strung out, but I wasn't ready to quit. That night I made a decision I'm not sure I'd make again. I left the guest bedroom door open on purpose. I sat on the couch in the living room with only one lamp lit, camera pointed toward the hallway. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock. The wind howled outside, but the house stayed still. Then at 1:27 a.m., I heard soft footsteps upstairs, not hurried, slow, measured, coming from the direction of the guest bedroom. I raised the camera and pressed the shutter as the sound reached the top of the stairs. What stepped into view wasn't clear in the half-light, but I saw enough. Small, pale, dressed in something loose and dark. It stopped halfway into the hallway, turned its head toward me, and smiled. I didn't take another photo. I couldn't. My hands had gone rigid around the camera. It turned away and walked back toward the guest bedroom, vanishing into shadow without a sound. I stayed awake until dawn, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. By the 5th night, the house had stopped feeling like a place I was renting. It felt like a place I was trespassing in. The difference was subtle, but it was there in the air. Heavy, still, like a room where someone had been holding their breath for hours. I kept telling myself I had one more night to stick it out, then I'd pack up and leave. That afternoon, I did something reckless. I went into the guest bedroom for the first time since arriving. The air in there was colder than the rest of the house. The walls were bare except for a single nail above the bed where a picture might have hung. The bedspread was faded, patterned with little green leaves. I stood there for a while, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. But as I turned to leave, I noticed the closet door was ajar. Inside, the space was empty except for an old wooden chair. The seat was scuffed, worn smooth in the middle. I don't know why, but the sight of that chair made the hairs on my neck rise. I closed the closet and left the door wide open behind me. That night, I didn't bother with cameras. I didn't want to watch later. I wanted to see it, if it came, with my own eyes. Around 2:40 a.m., I woke to the sound of breathing, not my own. Slow, steady, coming from the hallway. I sat up in bed. The door to my room was closed, but the breathing didn't stop. Then the doorknob began to turn. My chest tightened. Every muscle locked. The knob twisted once, twice, then stilled. After a long pause, the sound of footsteps padded away toward the guest bedroom. I didn't move until the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains. That morning, I packed my gear, my clothes, everything I'd brought. I left the keys in the mailbox without knocking on the landlord's door. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, back home in my apartment, that I saw the last piece of the puzzle. I was sorting through my wildlife photos from Asheville when I found one that didn't belong. It was taken inside the guest bedroom at night. I hadn't taken it. I hadn't even left my bedroom that night. The photo showed the pale figure sitting cross-legged on the bed, head tilted, eyes fixed on the camera. The smile was small but wrong, the kind of smile that feels like it's meant for someone else but lands on you instead. I deleted the photo. It didn't help. The image stayed with me anyway. I've been in plenty of empty woods, plenty of remote cabins, plenty of lonely roads since then. I still take pictures, still crouch for hours waiting for a bird to appear. But I never stay in houses I don't know, and I always keep the doors closed at night. Because sometimes it isn't about whether you believe in ghosts. Sometimes it's about whether something believes in you. Safety isn't just about where you are, it's about what you let in. Some doors, once opened, never truly close again. I used to tell myself I liked living alone. People would give me that raised eyebrow look when I said it, like I was either fiercely independent or quietly broken. The truth was less glamorous. I liked control. I liked knowing if the dishes were in the sink, I was the one who put them there. If a light was left on, it was because I left it on. After what happened 2 years earlier, a mugging in a grocery store parking lot, control was my way of keeping the world at arm's length. That night in April, Charleston was wrapped in the kind of damp heat that made even your skin feel tired. My little second-floor apartment sat a block from the Ashley River, in an old brick building that still had the bones of a hotel from the 70s. The place had charm if you squinted hard enough, but most days it was just creaky floors, windows that rattled in the wind, and an elevator that wheezed like it was doing me a favor. I'd been there 6 months. In that time, I'd developed my own rituals. 3 locks on the front door, pepper spray on the coffee table, a habit of glancing over my shoulder even in the hallway. My sister Julia teased me about it whenever we Skyped. "You live like you're in witness protection," she'd say. But she wasn't the one who'd had hands come out of the dark once. That evening, I was still at my desk at 9, polishing the last pages of a manuscript for a client who paid well enough to justify my sore eyes. Outside, the wind was getting pushy, bending the palms in the parking lot and rattling the sliding glass door that led to my balcony. The forecast had promised thunderstorms, and Charleston doesn't do storms halfway. At 9:15, my doorbell rang. I didn't move at first. The building's front entrance locked automatically at 8, which meant whoever it was either lived here or got buzzed in, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I crept to the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty. Dim yellow light, faded wallpaper, and the low electric hum from the fixture overhead. No footsteps retreating, no voices, just stillness. I waited there longer than I'd like to admit before backing away. The skin between my shoulders was tight, like it knew better. "Probably kids," I muttered. But the rain started around 10. Not a soft drizzle, the heavy, relentless kind that turns streets into mirrors. The sound filled the apartment, made it feel smaller. I was halfway through reheating pasta when I remembered the folding chair I'd left out on the balcony that morning. The wind could easily knock it over, send it clanging into the rail. I slid the glass door open and stepped out into the wet air. The metal rail was slick under my hands. Across the street lamp outside the laundromat flickered, buzzing faintly in the downpour. And that's when I saw him. A man stood under the lamp. Tall, lean, head tilted back, not toward the sky, but toward me. Even from that distance, I could feel the directness of it, like he'd been standing there long enough to forget to pretend otherwise. His clothes clung to him in the rain, dark and shapeless. He didn't move. I froze, fingers clamped on the chair. A flash of lightning cracked the night open, and for the shortest fraction of a second, I thought I saw the corner of his mouth lift. By the time my eyes adjusted again, the space beneath the street lamp was empty. I went inside fast, locking the balcony door until I heard the latch click. My phone was already in my hand. "Rachel." Some guy was just staring up at my balcony. Super creepy. "Julia. Do you want me to call Mom or stay on the phone with you?" "Rachel. No, just locking up. Probably nothing." I told myself that, over and over. But long after I killed the lights, I was still lying there, listening to the rain and thinking about the way he hadn't moved. Not a step, not a twitch. At 2:04 a.m., I woke to the sound of water inside my apartment. It wasn't the rain I heard this time. Not exactly. It was slower, deliberate. A drip, drip, drip that didn't belong to the weather outside. I pushed the blanket aside and sat up, holding my breath. My bedroom door was cracked just enough for me to see a sliver of the living room. It was dark out there, but I could make out the faint silver glow from the balcony glass. The sound was coming from that direction. I padded barefoot down the short hall, every step slower than the last. That's when I saw it. Small, irregular puddles dotting the hardwood. They stretched from the sliding balcony door toward the kitchen. At first I thought maybe the rain had blown in somehow, but the glass was shut tight. And the puddles weren't clear. They were murky, with bits of grit and faint smears like someone had tracked them in. I crouched down, my throat tightening. In the middle of each puddle was the faint outline of a bare foot. The toes, the arch, the heel, each print more distinct than the last, leading farther into the apartment. I backed up, my pulse hammering in my ears. My phone was on the kitchen counter, but that meant stepping past the prints. No way. I bolted into my bedroom, locked the door, and grabbed the phone from my nightstand. My fingers were shaking as I dialed 911. "This is Charleston County Emergency," a calm female voice answered. "Emergency? What's your, I think..." My throat caught. "I think someone's in my apartment." She asked for my address, which I gave in a rush. Please send someone." "I'm in my bedroom. The door's locked." "Stay on the line with me, Rachel. Officers are on their way. Do not leave your room." I sat on the floor, my back against the bed, pepper spray in one hand, phone in the other. My breathing was loud in my ears. And then, the sound of a floorboard groaning. Close. Too close. I pressed the phone harder to my ear. "He's here," I whispered. "Can you describe what you hear?" she asked. "Someone's..." My voice died in my throat. Slow, deliberate breathing. Not mine. Just on the other side of the door. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, with the dispatcher's voice grounding me in that dim, suffocating room. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. The breathing stopped. I thought maybe he'd moved away. I strained to hear any hint of footsteps, but the silence was worse. Then came a knock. Not on my door, but on the window behind me. I bit down on a scream. My room faced the parking lot. We were on the second floor. Whoever it was had to be standing on the narrow ledge outside. The dispatcher's tone shifted. "Rachel, stay exactly where you are. The officers are pulling in now." A flicker of red and blue light bled through the blinds. Relief surged in me so hard it almost made me dizzy. I stayed where I was until I heard the pounding knock on my front door and the unmistakable command, "Charleston Police, open up!" 2 officers swept the apartment. They didn't find anyone. I wanted to believe that meant I'd imagined it, but then the taller officer called me over to the spare bedroom, a room I never used. Inside, on the floor, was a neatly folded blanket. Beside it, a couple of grocery bags with unopened food. An empty water bottle sat tipped on its side. The officer crouched, studying the scene. "Looks like someone's been living here," he said, his voice grim. "Nothing's missing, though. This isn't about stealing. Probably watching you." That sentence hit me harder than the footprints had. They took my statement and suggested I stay with someone for the night. But it was 3 a.m., and I didn't want to knock on a friend's door looking like a ghost. So I sat on my couch with every light in the place on until the sun came up. I moved out within the week. The move was fast, almost frantic. I didn't even pack neatly, just shoved clothes into garbage bags, taped boxes without labeling them, left dishes in the sink for the cleaning crew. My landlord didn't ask questions when I said I wouldn't be renewing. He just nodded, told me he'd heard about some strange things in the building before. That was enough confirmation for me. I found a 1-bedroom on the other side of town, newer building, gated parking, keypad entry. It cost more than I wanted to spend, but after that night, I would have paid triple just to sleep without looking over my shoulder. The first week there, I didn't unpack much. I told myself it was because I was busy with work, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to settle in. That nagging thought, "It's easier to leave if you need to," still lingered. One Saturday afternoon, almost 2 months after the move, I decided to make myself unpack properly. I started with clothes, pulling crumpled shirts and sweaters from one of the large trash bags I'd used in the rush. Halfway down, my hands froze. It was a Polaroid photograph, the old square kind with a white border, the image slightly warped from moisture. My first thought was that it must have been mixed in accidentally, maybe something from my sister's old camera. But when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. It was me, sleeping. I was curled on my side in bed, blanket pulled halfway over me, hair across my face. The shot had been taken from outside my balcony glass. I could see the faint reflection of rain in the corner of the image, like the night had been wet. My chest tightened as I turned the photo over. The back was blank, no writing, no date. But I knew when it was taken. The rain, the balcony, the man under the street lamp. It was that night. The thought settled in my bones like ice. He hadn't just been watching me from the street. He'd been inside before, close enough to take this. I sat there for a long time, the photo limp in my hands. I didn't call the police. What could I say? It had been months, and they hadn't found him the first time. Instead, I slipped the Polaroid into a Ziploc bag, tucked it deep in the back of my desk drawer, and tried to pretend it wasn't there. I got better at locking doors. Every lock, every time. I stopped leaving my balcony unlocked even for a minute. I started checking closets before bed, pulling the shower curtain open, glancing under the bed. Little routines that became second nature. But here's what no one tells you. Once you've felt that cold understanding that someone has been inside your space, inside your life, without permission, the locks are never enough. You sleep lighter, you listen harder, you learn to hear the difference between a building settling and a footstep, and you never, ever ignore that quiet, prickling instinct that says something's wrong. Because the truth is, it only takes a minute, and sometimes, that's all they need. We spend so much of our lives assuming danger announces itself. A loud crash, a scream, a shattering window. But the worst kinds of harm often arrive silently, slipping through the smallest cracks in our routines. Pay attention to those small instincts, the tiny alarms in your head. Trust them, because they might be the only warning you get. Some people say you get used to living alone. I don't think that's true. You just learn how to pretend you're comfortable with it. When I moved into the little ground floor apartment in Burlington, I told myself it was exactly what I needed. Simple, affordable, close to the diner where I worked. It sat on a quiet residential street lined with maples. Most of the neighbors were older, and at night, you could hear the wind off the lake. After years of roommates, dorm noise, and a relationship that ended with me packing my life into garbage bags, the stillness felt like control. My parents weren't speaking to me anymore. They'd wanted me to finish school, but I'd walked away halfway through my degree to work full-time. That decision split us clean down the middle, and by the time I realized how deep the cut was, there was no stitching it back together. The only thing that kept me sane was painting. I'd set up my easel in the living room right in front of the big bay window. During the day, the light poured in perfectly. At night, it worked the other way. Anyone on the street could see me framed in that warm square of glass. At first, I didn't care. Nobody in this neighborhood paid much attention anyway. I noticed him in late September. A man, maybe mid-40s, came into the diner during the slow lull between lunch and dinner. He sat in the far booth by the window, black coffee in front of him. Hours would pass. He never ordered food, never spoke except to ask for refills. His eyes, though, they followed me whenever I crossed the floor. I figured he was lonely, maybe a little odd but harmless. We get all types at the diner. But then came the notes. The first was folded and tucked under my windshield wiper after a shift. "You look so peaceful when you're painting." I stared at it for a long time in the parking lot, more puzzled than afraid. How did he know I painted? I shrugged it off. 2 weeks later. "The blue dress is my favorite on you." I didn't wear a blue dress to work. I hadn't worn one in months, except at home. By October, the notes had become a pattern. Always short, always personal, always unsigned. I told my coworker Jess one night as we rolled silverware. She frowned hard. "Claire, if he's noticing what you wear at home, that means he's watching you there." The way she said it made my skin tighten. Still, I didn't call the police. What would I say? A man might be watching me through my window. It felt flimsy, paranoid. Maybe I wanted to believe I was overreacting. November 21st was my one night off that week. I made tea, lit a couple of candles, and set up to paint. Music low, brushes lined up, the familiar smell of acrylics in the air. The world felt far away. Around 9, I passed the front window to grab more water for my tea and thought I saw movement outside. Just a shadow, quick and low, like a branch shifting in the wind. I told myself it was nothing. An hour later, I was bent over my canvas mixing a deep green when my phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. "The green paint suits you." I froze, brush dripping on the floor. My phone's location was off. I hadn't posted anything about painting tonight. Slowly, I turned toward the window. The streetlight was dim, half blown out. But there, just beyond the glass, was the outline of a man. Still, watching. I backed away, heart pounding, and dialed 911. My voice shook as I whispered to the dispatcher, "Someone's outside my window, he's just standing there." She told me to lock myself in a room until officers arrived. I grabbed my phone, slipped into my bedroom, and turned the lock. I could hear my own breathing loud in the small space. Then from the living room came the faint click of my front door's latch. "Claire? Are you in there?" It wasn't the police. The voice was soft, calm, almost like he already knew I was inside. I didn't answer. I stayed pressed against the bedroom door, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to make a sound. My eyes darted to the window, but it was too small to fit through, and even if I could, the drop to the frozen ground outside would break something. The footsteps started then, slow, deliberate creaks across the hardwood floor. My lamp sat on the nightstand, heavy ceramic base, and I wrapped my fingers around it so tightly my knuckles ached. The steps stopped. I strained to hear breathing, anything, but the silence felt heavier than the air itself. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. It was impossible to tell. Then came the sound of something brushing against the hallway wall. Fingertips, clothing. I bit down on my lip so hard I tasted blood. The voice again, closer this time. "You left your window open, Claire." It wasn't true. I hadn't touched the window all night. He was lying to get me to respond. I kept the phone line open, whispering into it. "He's inside. Please tell them to hurry. They're on their way," the dispatcher said. Her tone stayed steady, but I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard, the low murmur of another voice on her end. "Stay with me. Do not open that door." A floorboard groaned just outside my bedroom. I tightened my grip on the lamp. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, my breath quick and shallow. And then, nothing. No retreat. No movement. Just stillness. When the first knock came, I almost dropped the lamp. It wasn't on my bedroom door. It came from the front of the apartment. Hard, fast pounding, followed by a man's voice calling, "Burlington Police, open up." I didn't move until the dispatcher confirmed it was them. "Open the door now." "That's the officers, Claire. You can—" I eased my bedroom door open, the lamp still clutched like a weapon. The living room was empty. The front door stood slightly ajar, letting in a thin blade of cold November air. Two officers stepped inside, scanning the apartment. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other younger, eyes sharp as he moved through each room. "Stay here," the taller one told me. "We'll check the perimeter." I stood in the living room, the adrenaline leaving me shaky and lightheaded. I kept expecting to see him lurking in the corner, just out of sight. But the only sound was the low murmur of the officers as they cleared the space. After a few minutes, the younger officer called me over to the coffee table. "Was this here before?" On the table, sitting dead center, was a Polaroid photograph, the kind you have to shake after taking. The image showed me sleeping in my own bed, curled under the blankets. The angle was from the foot of the bed, my bedroom. I felt my stomach turn over. That wasn't here. The younger officer glanced at his partner, then back at me. "You keep a spare key anywhere? There's no sign of forced entry. No, I mean, maybe the landlord has one." "Could be," he said, though his voice made it sound like he didn't buy it. Nothing in the apartment was stolen. My wallet sat in plain view. My laptop, my phone, untouched. "This wasn't about theft," the taller officer said quietly. "They took the photo as evidence, advised me to stay with someone for the night, and left to canvass the area. I sat on the couch until the sun rose, every light on, the front door locked and chained. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was moving out. I packed in a single day, clothes in trash bags, art supplies in boxes, dishes wrapped in whatever towels I could grab. I didn't care about organizing. I didn't care about breaking things. I just wanted out. Jess let me crash in her spare room while I searched for a new place. I didn't tell the landlord why I was leaving. I didn't even wait for my lease to end. I just paid the penalty and left the keys on the counter. For weeks, I jumped at every noise. A car door slamming outside, footsteps in the hallway. Even Jess knocking on my door made my pulse spike. My sleep was a mess, shallow, broken, and full of dreams where I'd wake up to find someone sitting in the corner of my room. Eventually, I found a second-floor apartment across town. No bay windows, no easy view from the street. I bought thicker curtains and kept them drawn tight. It wasn't the light I missed. It was the illusion that the world wasn't watching me. Months passed. I started to feel normal again, or at least something close to it. I worked, I painted, I took the long way home if I thought someone might be following me. The fear dulled into a background hum. Then, in early March, I came home to find a package on my doormat. No return address. Just my name in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was my missing blue dress, the one I hadn't seen since last summer. It was folded perfectly, like it had been pressed, and when I touched it, it was warm. Not like it had been in the sun, warm like someone had just taken it off. I stood there for a long time, the dress in my hands, before finally stuffing it into a garbage bag and walking it straight to the dumpster behind the building. I didn't even want it in the apartment for another second. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the walls, every gust of wind against the window, my mind filled in with his presence. I knew I might never see him again. I also knew I might never stop looking for him in every crowd. The police never found him. Without fingerprints, witnesses, or clear camera footage, the case went nowhere. In the report, it was just listed as suspicious circumstances, unknown suspect. But for me, it's never been unknown. I know exactly who it was. I just don't know when he'll come back. Danger isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and watching long before it acts. Trust your instincts, even when you feel silly, even when you think you're overreacting. Fear might just be your body's way of warning you before it's too late. Seattle has its own kind of loneliness. The rain doesn't fall hard, it lingers, clings to your coat, seeps into your shoes. The streets shine under neon signs, but you can walk 3 blocks without making eye contact with a single person. When I moved into the Rainier View residences, I thought the city would feel smaller from the 18th floor, that being high above it would make me feel in control. I was wrong. The loft had floor-to-ceiling glass walls on 2 sides, giving me a panoramic sweep of downtown and the sound in the distance. At night, the whole city glowed beneath me like a living circuit board. It should have been beautiful, and sometimes it was, but it also made me feel exposed, like I was in a display case. Ethan, my boyfriend of 3 years, had just taken a 6-month research job overseas. We talked every day, but the absence in the apartment was a physical thing. A shadow in the corners, a cold spot in the bed. I threw myself into work to fill the space. As a financial analyst for a consulting firm, I had enough spreadsheets and market reports to keep me chained to my desk 14 hours a day. The Sunderson Energy account was killing me. Their numbers were a mess, and my job was to untangle them before the board meeting in December. I barely left the apartment except to grab takeout from the Thai place downstairs. My sleep schedule disintegrated. 2 or 3 hours at dawn, maybe a nap in the afternoon. It was on one of those late nights, maybe 3:30 a.m., that I first noticed it. I stood from my chair to stretch, rubbing the ache in my neck, and my eyes caught my reflection in the glass. Only, it didn't quite match me. My arm went up, but in the glass it rose a fraction of a second later. It was so subtle I thought I'd imagined it. I even laughed at myself. "You're losing it, Kayla," I muttered, turning back to my desk. Coffee and exhaustion. That's all it was. 2 nights later, on a video call with my manager, I caught the same lag out of the corner of my eye. My reflection's lips were moving slightly slower than mine. My words were out of sync with the mouth in the glass. Kayla, you still there? My manager's voice snapped me back. I mumbled something about a bad internet connection and ended the call. That was when I started testing it. Standing in front of the glass, I'd wave or nod, and most of the time it matched perfectly. But not always. Sometimes there was a delay. Sometimes the reflection's eyes lingered on me after I'd already turned away. I told myself I was just exhausted, that my brain was glitching like a bad live stream. But there was a thread of unease winding tighter every day. 3 days later, after working straight through the weekend, I was reheating leftovers when it happened again. Only this time there was no question. I crossed the living room toward the kitchen, bowl in hand, and glanced at the glass wall. My reflection was still sitting at my desk, not moving. Just there. The bowl clattered onto the counter. My first thought was that I was hallucinating. My second thought was that hallucinations don't hold their shape for more than a blink, and this thing wasn't fading. I stepped closer to the glass, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The city stretched out beyond me, 1,000 tiny lights against the black sky, but I didn't see any of it. All I saw was the me that wasn't me, head bent slightly like it was listening for something. "This isn't real," I whispered. "You're just tired. Go to bed." But I didn't. I sat in the dark, laptop closed, phone in hand, and waited. At 2:17 a.m., the reflection stood. I didn't move, but it did. Slowly, deliberately. It stepped toward the glass like it was on the other side, approaching me from somewhere I couldn't reach. I fumbled with my phone, pulling up the security camera app. The feed from the living room showed nothing but an empty view of the city. No movement, no figure, but when I looked up from the screen, it was still there, closer now. I called Ethan, whispering into the phone. "It's here. It's watching me." He told me to leave. Go to my sister's, now. I didn't want to turn my back on it, but eventually I backed toward the door, coat in hand. The last thing I saw before leaving was the reflection tilting its head and smiling in a way I've never smiled in my life. The hallway outside my apartment was bright and empty, but I still moved quickly, my shoes silent on the carpet. My pulse only eased when the elevator doors shut between me and the loft. Even then, I kept glancing at the mirrored steel walls, half expecting to see something in my reflection that wasn't supposed to be there. I spent the rest of the night at a 24-hour coffee shop a few blocks away. It was noisy, full of clinking mugs and soft jazz from overhead speakers. It should have been comforting, but my mind kept replaying the moment when the other me stood up. It wasn't just movement, it was intent. At 6 a.m., I called in sick and texted Ethan to let him know I'd stay somewhere else. But by mid-morning, I felt ridiculous. I hadn't slept, and exhaustion has a way of turning shadows into monsters. So, against Ethan's protests, I went back. The loft looked exactly as I'd left it. My desk was neat, the couch unruffled, the glass wall a flawless sheet of morning gray. The city outside was wrapped in fog. I tried to shake it off. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my desk, determined to prove there was nothing wrong. I worked until the sunset turned the glass into a black mirror again. For an hour, nothing happened. And then as I typed, I saw it in the corner of my eye. The reflection's head was tilted toward me, just slightly, as if it were listening again. I froze. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I turned my head to face it, and this time, it didn't move. It just stayed angled, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. The air in the apartment felt heavier, like all the oxygen had been pulled out. My scalp prickled. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My phone buzzed on the desk, snapping me out of it. A message from Ethan. "Please, Kayla, leave tonight. Something's wrong." That was enough. I grabbed my coat and left without looking back. The next morning, I went straight to the building's security office. The night guard, Marcus, was a stocky man in his 50s with a voice like gravel. I told him I'd seen something strange in my apartment, and I wanted to review the security footage. He didn't ask many questions. "You got cameras inside?" "One in the living room," I said. "All right, let's see what we got." We pulled up the feed from the night before. For nearly an hour, it was just me at the desk, typing. The reflection in the glass wall looked normal from the camera's perspective. No lag, no movement. Then around 9:40 p.m., Marcus paused the video. "You see that?" It was a single frame, almost easy to miss. My body was turned toward the desk, but the reflection was turned toward the camera. My stomach dropped. We scrolled forward frame by frame. In one, the reflection's mouth was curled into the faintest smile. In another, its eyes looked sharper, more focused than mine. And then it was gone, perfectly matching me again. "That's not possible," Marcus said, leaning back. "I told you," I whispered. He studied the footage for a long moment before saying, "You want my advice? Move. Tonight." By noon, I'd packed a suitcase and booked a hotel room. I told myself I'd come back for the rest when I could. But deep down, I knew I wasn't coming back at all. 2 weeks passed before I returned. The hotel was eating up my savings, and I needed to get my furniture, my clothes, my paintings, everything I'd left behind in that loft. I waited until mid-morning on a bright, windy Tuesday, hoping daylight would make the place feel less threatening. Marcus met me in the lobby. He offered to come up with me, and I didn't refuse. The apartment looked exactly as I remembered it. Dust on the desk, the faint smell of old coffee, the wide sheet of glass framing the skyline. It was hard to believe how much it had terrified me. Marcus stayed by the door while I started boxing up kitchen items. Every so often my eyes flicked toward the glass wall. It just reflected the city, the light, and me. Nothing more. I was sealing the last box when Marcus said, "Hold on, you moved this, right?" He was pointing to my office chair. I frowned. "No. Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped over and crouched down. There, faint in the plush carpet, was the outline of footprints. Bare feet. They started at the chair and stopped just short of the glass wall. I felt the skin on my arms tighten. "Marcus?" "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "You should go now." I didn't argue. I left with what I could carry, abandoning the rest. I didn't even ask for my security deposit back. 2 months later, I got an email from the building's management. They were offering former tenants first pick on newly renovated units. Out of morbid curiosity, I clicked through the photos. The loft looked brighter, modernized, cleaner, but in one of the wide shots of the living room, I saw something. In the reflection of the glass wall, just faint enough to question, was a figure standing behind the photographer. The head was tilted, and it was smiling. Not everything we see, or think we see, can be explained away by logic or exhaustion. Sometimes the wrong place can hold the wrong presence, and ignoring that instinct can be dangerous. When your mind screams that something is off, listen. Leaving might be the safest choice you'll ever make. If you've ever lived in an old New England house in winter, you know the sound it makes when the cold sinks into its bones. The walls creak, the pipes groan, and the wind slips through the cracks no matter how well you seal them. I'd been renting my 2-story place in Portsmouth for just under a year, and I thought I'd learned all its noises. The house wasn't big. 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 bathroom, a narrow hallway that caught the cold like a trap. My room faced the street, with an old maple tree outside that scraped its branches against the glass on windy nights. The other bedroom, the spare room, faced the backyard. I never used it. When I first moved in, I thought about turning it into an art space. The landlord had left it furnished with a queen bed, a wooden dresser, and a small nightstand with a single drawer. There was even a thick beige rug over the warped hardwood floor. But something about it felt staged, like it was set up for someone else, not me. I ended up closing the door after the first week and letting it collect dust. That Saturday in March, I had no real plans. Claire had canceled our brunch, the sidewalks were still half covered in ice, and I'd decided to hibernate. Laundry, a true crime podcast, and maybe some binge-watching before bed. That was my day. Around 2 in the afternoon, I was in the kitchen pouring another cup of coffee when I heard it, a dull thud from upstairs. It wasn't loud enough to be alarming, but it was enough to stop me mid-pour. I stood there for a second, listening. The radiator hummed, the fridge clicked on, and the silence upstairs stretched out. Probably the heat pipes, I said out loud, though I'd never heard them sound like that before. I let it go. By evening it was forgotten. The sun went down early as it does in March, and I made pasta while watching the street outside turn to shadow. Around 9:40 p.m., I was curled up on the couch with popcorn when the second thud came. Louder this time, heavier. I set the bowl down, climbed halfway up the stairs, and called out, "Hello?" Nothing. I waited a beat longer, trying to hear if anything moved, just the low hum of the radiator. My shoulders loosened, but I still found myself double-checking the locks before I sat down again. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being unsettled. In the kitchen, I noticed the salt shaker was on the opposite counter from where I'd left it earlier. The dish towel had fallen to the floor. Little things. Not enough to call anyone, but enough to make me feel watched. By the time I brushed my teeth, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. That was before midnight. I'd just drifted into that hazy space between waking and sleep when I heard it, the click of a door latch turning. I knew the sound instantly. I sat up, heart thudding, straining to hear. It came from the hallway. No, not the hallway. The spare room. I padded to my bedroom door and eased it open, my bare feet silent on the cold floor. The spare room's door was in my line of sight. Normally it was slightly ajar. I never bothered to shut it completely. Now it was shut. Not just shut, it was flush with the frame. I told myself it could have been a draft or the house settling, but drafts don't turn doorknobs. I stepped closer, every inch of me alert. My fingers brushed the cold brass knob. It didn't turn. Locked from the inside. And then I heard it. Soft. Subtle. Fabric shifting against fabric. I backed up so fast I nearly tripped. Nope. 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 The fear hit me all at once. The kind of fear that wipes every rational thought from your head. I bolted down the stairs, grabbed my coat, and ran outside barefoot into the freezing night air. From the sidewalk, I dialed 911. My voice was shaking so badly I had to repeat the address twice before the dispatcher got it right. The police arrived within minutes. They entered in pairs, weapons drawn, moving room to room. I stood outside, hugging myself against the cold. 10 minutes later, an officer called me inside. "You're gonna want to see this." In the spare room, the bed was unmade. Grocery bags were stuffed under it. Instant noodles, bottled water, protein bars. A blanket I didn't own lay crumpled near the dresser. The officer looked at me with that calm, professional face cops get when they don't want to scare you. "Someone's been staying here," he said. "Probably slipped out when they heard us." I didn't sleep at home that night. I stayed at Claire's. But even as I lay on her couch, warm under a borrowed blanket, one thought wouldn't leave me. How long had they been here before I noticed? The next morning I went back with Claire. I didn't want to face the place alone. We pulled up just after sunrise, the pale March light making the house look smaller than I remembered. Inside, the air was still. Too still. It didn't smell like my home anymore. It smelled faintly of someone else's laundry detergent, a scent I couldn't place. The police had cleared everything the night before. The grocery bags were gone, the bed was made again. But there was something unsettling about the way the room looked now. Too neat. As if the mess had been erased, but not the memory of it. Claire walked over to the window, peering out into the frost-covered backyard. "Been coming in and out while you were at work," she said quietly. "They must have..." I shook my head. "No, I work from home most days." That made her turn to look at me. I could see the thought forming in her face before she spoke. Then they were here while you were here. The words made my skin crawl. I thought about the little things I'd been brushing off for months. A coffee mug not where I left it, a blanket on the couch slightly rumpled, the bathroom mirror fogged when I hadn't showered yet. We didn't stay long. Claire grabbed a box from the living room and started helping me pack a few essentials. I was stuffing clothes into a duffel bag when she stopped in the hallway. "Hey," she called. "Was this like this before?" She was pointing upward. The attic hatch, a small square cut into the ceiling with a pull string, was hanging open by an inch. Dust was scattered on the floor beneath it, and faint shoe prints marked the wood. I didn't remember the hatch ever being open. Claire backed away from it. "I'm not touching that." Neither was I. We left the rest of my things behind. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the last few weeks in my head. Every odd sound, every misplaced object, every moment I'd shrugged off because I didn't want to seem paranoid. The attic explained it all. The police thought the person had been using the spare room as a base, but that hatch meant they could have been anywhere in the house without me knowing. They could have been standing in the hallway while I was asleep, listening, watching. I went through my phone photos from the last few months, looking for clues. In one shot of my living room, taken during a Zoom call in January, the spare room door was visible in the background. I zoomed in, half expecting to see something, and there it was, just barely. A sliver of a shadow at the edge of the doorway. It could have been anything. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became it was a person. The police never found the intruder. No fingerprints, no footprints outside in the snow. The attic was empty when they checked it, and the back door locks showed no sign of tampering. Whoever they were, they had a way in and out that nobody figured out. I broke the lease the next morning, packed what I could fit in my car, and left the key on the counter. I didn't even look back at the house as I drove away. I thought leaving the house would put distance between me and the unease, but it followed me. Even at Claire's place, I found myself checking her spare room 3-4 times a night. I'd stand in the doorway, staring into the shadows until my eyes adjusted, half expecting to see someone curled up in the corner. The thing about not knowing who it was, or how long they'd been there, is that your mind fills in the blanks. Every creak in the floorboards becomes a footstep. Every faint draft becomes someone moving behind you. 2 weeks after I moved out, I got an email from the property management company. They wanted to know if I'd left anything behind before they started showing the house again. I ignored it, but that night, curiosity got the better of me. I clicked the online listing. The photos were bright, cheerful, a staged couch with colorful throw pillows, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors. But in the picture of the upstairs hallway, something made my skin tighten. The attic hatch was closed, yes, but there was a faint smear of dust trailing from it toward the spare room door, like something had been dragged across the ceiling. I shut my laptop. I didn't sleep that night. Weeks later, Claire sent me a news link. The headline read, "Portsmouth police investigating break-ins. Residents report missing food, moved objects." The article mentioned my old street. They still hadn't caught anyone. Even now in my new apartment, I keep a chair wedged under my bedroom door at night. I never use the spare room. I don't even open the door. Some habits, once you learn them, don't leave. We like to think we'd notice if someone crossed the line into our space, but real danger often hides in the ordinary. Listen to the unease. Trust the small alarms in your head. The moment you start explaining them away is the moment someone can make themselves at home where they don't belong. In the summer of 1994, I was 9 years old and suddenly without a place to call home. My parents weren't divorcing quietly. They were dismantling their marriage with the kind of shouting that cracked through walls and bled into my dreams. My mother's sister suggested sending me to Grandma's place in Las Cruces for the summer. "It'll be good for her," she told my mom. "Some peace and quiet, and she'll get to be outside instead of cooped up in that mess." Peace and quiet sounded strange to me, like a thing people made up in movies. But Grandma's house was exactly that, a squat, sun-baked single-story with faded green shutters and a porch swing that sighed with every sway. The place smelled like sagebrush and sun-warmed wood, and at night the air was thick with the hum of cicadas. Grandma was not the rocking chair, cookie-baking type. She was wiry, sharp-eyed, and carried herself like a person who'd lived too far from the city to expect help to come quickly. She'd been widowed for years and knew every person on her street by name, and every person's business too. Her one hard rule for me came on my first night, when I tried to wander past the gate to chase a lizard along the dirt road. She called me back sharp. "You don't go past that gate after dark," she said, her voice low and steady. "Why?" I asked. She didn't even glance up from her crocheting. "Because people out there don't always want to be seen." That first week passed slow. Mornings meant cereal and cartoons. Afternoons were for drawing or reading, and evenings, I'd sit on the porch swing while she crocheted inside. I'd rock back and forth, toes brushing the dusty boards, and watch the sunset bleed into the horizon. Sometimes I'd hear the faint yip of a coyote or the rumble of a truck heading toward the highway, but mostly it was just stillness. It wasn't until the second Saturday night that something broke that stillness. Grandma had gone to bed early, complaining of a headache. I stayed outside longer than usual, the Coke in my hand sweating against my palm, the porch swing creaking in rhythm. The streetlight near the end of the road flickered weakly, throwing half shadows onto the gravel. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps on loose stone. Not hurried, not clumsy, just steady. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I leaned forward, peering toward the gate. My first thought was it might be one of the neighborhood kids coming back from somewhere, but the air felt wrong. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking in the still night. No answer. A warm wind pushed the smell of creosote across the porch, and I felt a chill crawl up my arms despite the heat. That's when I saw them. Two shapes at the far end of the dirt road, one taller, one shorter, both perfectly still. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just neighbors talking. Maybe they were lost, but they weren't talking, and they weren't moving. I slid off the swing and stepped inside, letting the screen door close behind me with a soft click. The living room light cast a reflection on the glass, making it hard to see outside, but I couldn't resist checking again. I pressed my face close to the window. They were closer now, just beyond the gate. The taller one's head was tilted like he was studying the house. The smaller figure, a woman, I guessed, stood with her arms hanging stiffly at her sides, unmoving. I couldn't see their faces clearly, just shadows with edges. But I knew, with the kind of certainty that made my stomach knot, that they were looking right at me. I thought about waking Grandma, but she'd been tired all week, her headaches coming more often. I hesitated, then decided against it. I didn't want to sound like some scared little kid over nothing. Instead, I went to the fireplace, my heart pounding, and grabbed the poker. It felt heavy in my hands, the metal cold even in the summer heat. I stood near the front door listening. Then came the knock. Not on the door, on the window. I froze. My reflection in the glass looked pale, wide-eyed. And then, in the corner of the pane, the man's face appeared, dimly lit, just enough for me to see the faint curve of a smile. Instinct overrode thought. I swung the poker hard, the crack of shattering glass exploding into the quiet night. The figures jerked back, and then they were running, their shapes slipping into the darkness beyond the streetlight. I stood there, breathing hard, the poker still in my grip, shards of glass glittering at my feet. That's when I finally called for Grandma. Grandma came out of her room fast for someone her age, robe tied crooked, eyes sharp the moment she saw the broken glass. "What happened?" she asked, her voice quick but steady. "There were people," I stammered. "At the window. They were watching." She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't tell me I'd imagined it. She just crossed the room to the phone mounted on the wall and started dialing. "Sam," she said when someone picked up. "Get over here, bring a light." Within minutes, my Uncle Sam was jogging up the driveway with two of the neighbors behind him. One carried a heavy mag light, the other a wooden baseball bat. I clutched the poker like my life depended on it while Grandma filled them in. They didn't waste time. Sam headed straight for the gate, sweeping his flashlight across the dirt road. The beam caught two distinct sets of footprints, one larger, one smaller, pressed into the loose gravel. They followed the trail past the edge of the streetlight's reach, into the darker stretch where the road thinned out toward the desert. And then the track stopped. Just gone. Could have stepped off into the brush, one neighbor muttered, scanning the shadows, hiding. Or their Sam kept the beam moving over the mesquite and dry weeds, but nothing moved. The night swallowed every sound except the faint hum of insects. When they came back, Grandma locked the gate with a padlock I didn't even know she had, then locked the screen door and the main door. She set the shotgun on the table beside her chair, a quiet warning to whatever, or whoever, was out there. That night, she made up a bed for me in her room. We didn't talk much. I think she knew that anything she said, "It's fine," or "You're safe now," would have rung hollow. I fell asleep listening to the occasional creak of the house, wondering if those people were still out there in the dark. Morning came harsh and bright. I followed Grandma to the porch, squinting into the sun. The shattered window still gaped, glass shards scattered on the porch boards. Outside the gate, the footprints were clear in the daylight, leading up to the spot where they'd vanished. Grandma didn't linger. "Eat your breakfast," she said, heading inside to call the police. 2 officers came by before noon. One was young and polite, the other older, with a weathered face that didn't seem surprised by much. They took my statement while Grandma stood with her arms crossed, glaring toward the road. When I described the man's smile, the younger cop glanced at the older one. "We've had a few reports of a pair like that. Tall male, shorter female. They hang around houses watching. Might be checking for empty places. Burglars?" Grandma asked. "Most likely," the older one said, though his tone carried a hint of something else. After they left, Grandma went quiet. She spent the rest of the day in the kitchen, cleaning and cooking, but I noticed how often she glanced toward the window, even though it was now covered with plywood. That evening she surprised me by sitting with me on the porch swing, something she hadn't done before. The shotgun rested against the wall beside her. We didn't say much. The cicadas buzzed, the sun dipped low, and the shadows stretched across the dirt road. For the first time, I realized she wasn't just keeping me company. She was watching the dark. The next morning, the kitchen smelled of strong coffee and warm tortillas. Grandma already had the Las Cruces Sun News folded open on the table. She tapped the small headline with one finger. "Police warn residents after pair of suspected burglars spotted near homes." The description made my stomach tighten. Tall man, smaller woman, seen late at night near houses on the outskirts of town. No arrests had been made. The police were urging caution. Grandma slid the paper toward me, her face unreadable. "That's them," I whispered. She didn't answer, just sipped her coffee, but her free hand found mine and squeezed. Life didn't go back to normal after that. For the rest of the summer, we locked up before sunset. If we sat on the porch at night, it was never alone. Sometimes Grandma would hum an old hymn while the swing creaked back and forth. I don't know if it was for comfort or to let anyone listening know that we were awake, alert, and not afraid. When August came, my parents drove out from California to pick me up. I didn't tell them much about that night, just that we'd had strangers near the house. But when I hugged Grandma goodbye, I felt the weight of what had happened settle deep inside me. It wasn't about the broken window or even the strangers. It was about knowing that safety could be thin as glass and just as easy to shatter. On the drive back west, I kept thinking about the desert road beyond the gate. In daylight, it looked harmless. At night, it was something else entirely. I realized then why Grandma had given me that rule. It wasn't superstition. It was survival. Years later, I'd still remember her sitting beside me in the dark, her shoulders squared, her eyes on the road, the shotgun at her side. She'd never called herself brave, but bravery doesn't always look like charging into danger. Sometimes it's just holding your ground when the shadows press in. Trust the instincts of those who've walked the road before you. Rules made from experience aren't there to limit you. They're there to protect you from dangers you can't yet see. I'd never been the kind of person to get uneasy in my own home. Daniel used to joke that I could fall asleep anywhere, in the middle of a thunderstorm, during a neighbor's late-night barbecue, even once at an airport gate with people bustling all around me. But that September, when he packed his carry-on and kissed me goodbye before heading to Denver, the house felt different. We'd lived in that small Madison bungalow for almost 8 years. One story, cedar siding, a tiny porch with 2 chairs that had never quite matched. The neighborhood was quiet in a way that made you notice small things: the thump of the mail in the box, the occasional squeak of a bike chain from kids riding past, the sound of our back neighbor's shovel cutting into dirt. That neighbor was Mr. Harland, retired, gray-haired, with the look of someone who'd been strong once and hadn't quite realized he wasn't anymore. He wasn't unfriendly, but he wasn't warm either. Our conversations were mostly limited to waves over the fence and the occasional exchange about the weather. I knew he did odd yard work at odd hours, but in a sleepy street like ours, quirks were part of the charm. The first night Daniel was gone, I barely noticed anything unusual. I painted for a while in my studio, an unfinished still life I'd been putting off, and then made myself tea. The second night, though, I caught movement in the backyard while rinsing my cup. It wasn't the slow sway of branches or the jittery dart of a rabbit. It was Harland, under the pale kitchen light, standing in the middle of his lawn with a shovel. The grass around him was cut into a perfect rectangle. I thought maybe he was transplanting something, but then I saw the hole. It was deep, and it wasn't near any of his flower beds. I opened the back door and stepped into the cool air. Might if I'd run into him at the grocery store. "Evening, Mr. Harland," I called, He looked up, resting the shovel handle under his palms. His eyes were shadowed, unreadable. "Just getting rid of what needs to be gone," he said, his voice flat. I laughed awkwardly. "Big project?" No answer. He went back to digging. I went back inside, locking the door without thinking. But the next morning, when I saw him out there again, waist deep in the same hole, the uneasy feeling hadn't gone away. By the following night, that uneasy feeling had hardened into something sharper. It was 2:14 a.m. when I woke up, not from a noise, but from a strange orange flicker coming through the blinds. My first thought was fire. I pulled the cord to peek outside and froze. Harland was still out there. The hole was finished now, a dark gash in the lawn, and he was hammering a wooden cross into the ground above it. The glow came from a single lantern balanced on the grass beside him. He was talking quietly to himself, his words lost in the night air. The next day I called Daniel. "It's probably nothing," I told him, pacing from the kitchen to the living room and back. "But he's digging, like deep holes, and last night he put a cross in one. I don't know. It feels wrong." He sighed into the phone. "Call the non-emergency number. If it's nothing, no harm done." An officer came by that afternoon, a stocky man with a buzz cut and tired eyes. He crossed into Harland's yard, spoke with him for maybe 2 minutes, and came back shaking his head. He says it's a memorial for his dog. Seems harmless. Old man like that, probably just holding on to memories. I tried to accept it, but something about the way Harland had looked at me over the shovel still stuck in my mind. The next morning, I was painting when I heard it, the scrape of metal against soil. I went to the studio window and felt my stomach drop. He was digging a second hole. By Thursday, the rhythm of my day had shifted to match his. I found myself glancing toward the backyard every half hour, like I was keeping tabs on a storm that hadn't decided yet whether to break. The second hole was bigger than the first, wide enough that he had to climb in and out using the shovel for leverage. Around dusk, I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, hoping fresh air might clear my head. From this angle, I could see the neat piles of earth he'd made. The hole was so deep now I could only see the top of his head when he bent down. He worked without gloves, his nails blackened from dirt. I thought about walking over, starting some harmless small talk, but something in my gut stopped me. Instead, I lingered on the porch until he finally went inside. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every creak in the house felt magnified. Every shadow along the ceiling seemed to stretch too far. Somewhere around midnight, I heard it. Not the scrape of a shovel this time, but a faint metallic clink. The sound came in intervals, like chains being shifted or dragged. I sat up, heart thudding, straining to hear. It stopped. Then, after a few minutes, it came again. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over Daniel's contact, but I didn't want to wake him in Denver over what might still be nothing. Instead, I stayed curled under the covers, listening until exhaustion finally pulled me under. The next morning, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I carried my coffee to the kitchen, ready to peek through the blinds, and froze. Near the shed that sat against his fence, there was a large black trash bag. It was tied tightly. The plastic stretched around something inside. The shape was wrong. Not round like yard waste. Long. Rigid. From my angle, I could have sworn it looked like an arm. By noon, I was pacing the living room with my phone pressed to my ear. This time, I didn't call Daniel first. "Non-emergency police, what's the address?" the dispatcher asked. I told her, my voice tight. "I know how this sounds, but there's a bag in my neighbor's yard. It doesn't look like garbage, and he's been digging holes. Big ones." They sent a different officer this time. He stayed in Harlan's yard for longer, and maybe 10 minutes, before coming back. His face was polite, but there was an edge to his voice when he said, "We're aware of the situation. We're in the process of getting a search warrant. For now, stay in your house and keep your doors locked." Those last words didn't feel like standard advice. That night, the air was heavy with a September humidity that clung to everything. I sat in my studio, lights off, watching his yard through a narrow slit in the blinds. At some point, I must have dozed off in the chair because the next thing I knew, I was waking to the sound of a car pulling into his driveway. A woman got out. Mid-30s, tall, her expression tight in a way I recognized. The look of someone bracing for bad news. She knocked on his door, waited, then let herself in. The lights came on in the house. 15 minutes later, she stepped back outside with Harlan beside her. His movements were slower now, his shoulders sagging. She said something I couldn't hear, and he nodded. They got into her car and drove away. I didn't sleep that night either. The yard was silent, but I kept seeing that trash bag in my mind, sitting beside the shed in the dark. By the next afternoon, the yard looked different. Not cleaner exactly, but less alive. A crew of men in jeans and work gloves arrived in a battered pickup. They didn't talk much, just nodded at me when they saw me watching from the porch. One by one, they filled in the holes Harlan had dug, tamping the earth flat with the backs of their shovels. The wooden cross was pulled up and tossed into the truck bed. The trash bags, 3 of them now, were loaded in with the same quiet efficiency. No police cars, no flashing lights, no curious neighbors peering over fences. It was like someone had decided this was a problem best erased rather than explained. 2 days later, a for sale sign appeared in the yard. I didn't see Harlan again. When I finally got the courage to call the woman who'd picked him up and his daughter, she surprised me by answering. Her voice was warm but tired, as if she'd repeated this explanation too many times already. "My dad's been unwell for a while," she said. "It's dementia. He gets fixated on things, digging, burying, moving stuff around. Sometimes he tells me he's hiding valuables. Sometimes he says he's getting rid of bad memories. None of it makes sense, but it's never been violent." I wanted to ask about the bags, about the metallic clinking, about why the police had seemed so careful, but her voice softened and she said, "Please don't think badly of him. He was a good man. Still is, most of the time. After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen window, staring at the patch of dirt where the first hole had been. Maybe the bags had been nothing more than old junk. Maybe the clinking was just tools shifting in the shed. Maybe the only real danger was my imagination, stoked by a week alone in a quiet house. But sometimes, late at night, I still picture him in the yard under the moonlight, not confused, not lost, but deliberate, working with the patience of someone who knew exactly what he was burying and why. We often think danger only comes from strangers, but the truth is, we never fully know what's happening behind the fences and closed doors around us. It's better to trust your instincts even if they turn out to be wrong, because one day they might be the only thing standing between you and harm. Some Sundays feel like they've been pulled straight from a photograph, all muted light and soft air, a stillness you can almost hear. That's how it was on October 3rd, 2004, in Ridgefield, Connecticut. The kind of chilly autumn day where you can smell wood smoke long before you see it curling from the chimneys. Our house was small and square, a Cape Cod style with faded blue siding, and a porch that creaked when you stepped on the second board from the left. Inside, the rooms always felt a little dim in the fall, like the light came in reluctantly. My parents had a rhythm to Sundays that felt set in stone. Dad worked his weekend mechanic shifts down at Halpern's Auto, Mom volunteered at the animal shelter, and Matt, my older brother, was now 2 months into his freshman year of college. The house had never been truly loud, but without Matt, it had a different kind of quiet, heavier, like it was missing a heartbeat. I had my own way of filling the space. My bedroom upstairs was part workspace, part teenage mess, with rolls of film and photo prints scattered across the desk. My Nikon wasn't fancy, a second-hand FM10 with a slight dent on the side, but I loved it the way some kids loved their guitars. Photography made me feel like I could freeze the parts of life that mattered and ignore the ones that didn't. That morning, Mom had paused in the doorway before leaving, keys in hand. "Lock up after me," she said, "and don't wander outside. You heard about those weird break-ins?" I had. The Ridgefield Press had run a short piece about someone knocking on doors late at night, taking packages, sometimes moving things around on porches like they wanted you to notice. Most people assumed it was bored teenagers, a dare gone too far. I locked the front door after her and climbed upstairs to work on a few prints. The house groaned in that familiar way old houses do, settling into the afternoon. I was adjusting the contrast on a black and white photo when I heard it, a sharp, deliberate knock at the back door. Nobody ever used the back door except for us. My stomach tightened as I went downstairs, moving slowly enough that each step felt longer than the last. I peeked through the kitchen window. The deck was empty. The yard beyond it, with its patchy grass and maple trees, was still. I told myself it could have been a branch or a neighbor's kid cutting through the yard. But my hands felt a little too cold when I went back upstairs. I was trying to lose myself in my work again when the phone rang. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a man's voice, low, calm, almost conversational. "The light in your upstairs hallway just flickered. Did you see it?" I turned my head toward the landing. The bulb above the stairs swayed ever so slightly, casting shadows that shifted on the wall. "I think you have the wrong number," I said quickly, and hung up. I stood there for a while, my eyes fixed on the bulb, until the house seemed to settle again. But the air had changed. It wasn't the quiet of a Sunday afternoon anymore. It was the kind of quiet that waits for you to notice it. The second call came less than half an hour later. This time, there was no voice, just slow, steady breathing. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I expected. Click. I set the receiver down and listened. No footsteps, no creak of the porch. Just the low hum of the refrigerator. I told myself to stop overreacting, to focus on the photo I'd been editing. But my eyes kept wandering toward the hall outside my bedroom, the bulb over the stairs, the shadow it cast on the wall. By 4:15, the unease had built into something I couldn't ignore. I called Dad at work. "Someone's messing with me," I said. They called twice. They knew the light was flickering. "Kiddo, I'm buried in brake jobs. Probably just some prankster. Keep the doors locked and stay put. I'll be home in a couple hours." I hung up and headed to the kitchen to make tea. That's when I saw it. The back door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it. My hand trembled as I slid the bolt home. That's when I noticed the footprints, muddy, distinct, trailing from the door to the far corner of the kitchen and stopping. No exit path, no second trail, just gone. The hair on my neck prickled. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. My voice shook as I told the dispatcher what I'd seen. She told me to stay on the line. Officers were 2 minutes away. I'd just stepped into the hallway when I heard the floorboard creak upstairs. It was slow, deliberate, like someone shifting their weight. My grip tightened on the camera still hanging around my neck. And then I saw him. At the top of the stairs, standing just far enough in the shadows that I couldn't make out his face. His eyes caught the light, small, reflective points in the dark. He didn't run. He didn't move. He just watched me. The front door crashed open as the officers came in. I blinked, and the man was gone. The only thing left was a Polaroid on the top step. It was a picture of me, taken through my bedroom window earlier that day. The first thing the officers did was sweep the upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, clutching the edge of the counter, trying to hear over the thud of their boots and the creak of each floorboard they stepped on. Every sound felt louder than it should. One of them, Officer Kramer, according to the tag on his jacket, came down a few minutes later. He held up the Polaroid in a gloved hand. "Where did you say you found this?" "Top of the stairs," I said. My voice cracked a little. It wasn't there earlier. The other officer, Delaney, was still upstairs. I could hear him opening closet doors, moving things. When he came down, he shook his head. "No one's here now, but the attic hatch is loose, could have been hiding up there." The thought made my skin crawl. That attic was barely more than a crawl space, but I'd never liked going up there, even in daylight. "Do you lock your windows?" Kramer asked. "Most of them," I said. "The upstairs bathroom one sticks, so I usually leave it." He exchanged a look with Delaney. "That's probably how he got in. We'll dust for prints, but rain's coming tonight, so footprints outside might be a loss." They stayed another half hour, checking the yard and shining flashlights into the tree line. I stood by the back door, staring at the muddy prints in my kitchen, until they were just shapes, no longer footprints. Before they left, Kramer told me, "Keep your phone with you. If anything, and I mean anything, feels off, call us." We've had 2 other reports like this in the last month. After they were gone, the house felt wrong. Too empty in some corners, too crowded in others. I locked every window, double-checked the back door, and carried my camera into my room like it was something more than a camera, like it might keep me safe. It was almost 9 p.m. when Dad got home. The police had called him on the way to the station, so he knew the broad strokes. But seeing his face change when I showed him the Polaroid, that's what stuck with me. He didn't look scared. He looked furious. "I'm getting a new deadbolt for the back door tomorrow," he said, nailing it shut. And that window, where that night I kept my light on, every time the floor creaked or the house shifted, my breath caught. I didn't fall asleep until after 3 a.m., and when I did, I dreamed of standing at my own bedroom window, looking out, only to see a camera flash in the darkness. Monday morning came too early. I skipped the bus and let Dad drive me to school. We didn't talk much. He just kept drumming his fingers on the steering wheel at red lights, his jaw tight. When I got home that afternoon, the house felt just as I'd left it. No muddy prints, no open doors. But when I went upstairs, something small and out of place caught my eye. The stack of prints on my desk had been moved. Not much, just an inch or two, like someone had flipped through them and put them back. I called Kramer right away. He came by within 20 minutes, his cruiser parked at the curb like a warning sign. "You sure you didn't move them?" he asked. I'm sure. I haven't touched them since yesterday. He nodded slowly, looking toward the window. He's careful, and he's bold. We'll add it to the report. If he's coming back, that night, Dad didn't let me stay in the house alone. We ordered takeout, watched TV with the volume low, and left the porch light blazing. At 10 p.m., he walked the yard with a flashlight, checking behind the shed, under the deck. It was after midnight when I heard it again. A knock, faint but deliberate. This time not at the door or window, but at the wall. 3 slow taps. I froze in bed, my eyes fixed on the dark hallway beyond my doorway. I didn't get up. I didn't call out. Eventually the taps stopped, replaced by the soft crunch of footsteps in the yard. In the morning, Dad found a single Polaroid tucked under the windshield wiper of his truck. It was me again. Taken the night before, through my bedroom window, the curtains drawn halfway. My face was in shadow, but my eyes were open. The next week blurred into a mix of police visits, restless nights, and me avoiding my own room like it was a trap I'd accidentally built for myself. Dad stayed home more, calling in favors to swap shifts, but I could tell he was stretched thin. Kramer came by again on Thursday with an update, or maybe just to check that I was still holding together. We've got no match on the prints from the Polaroid, he said. If this guy's in the system, he's not in our county. That didn't make me feel better. It made me realize how small the net was. Saturday afternoon, Dad and I were in the driveway fixing the hinge on the front gate when a neighbor from 2 streets over stopped by. She'd read about the break-ins in the paper and wanted to tell us she'd seen someone standing at the edge of our yard earlier in the week. Tall, wearing a dark hoodie. She couldn't see his face, but she'd noticed something shiny in his hand. Could have been a phone, she said. Could have been a camera. That night, I slept on the couch in the living room with the TV on low. Around 1 a.m., the motion light in the backyard flared. Dad grabbed the flashlight and went out the back door, but the yard was empty. The only sign anyone had been there was a single muddy boot print on the deck. We didn't see him again after that. The police kept patrolling for a while, but by November, they'd moved on to other calls. Life was supposed to go back to normal, but it didn't. Not really. By Christmas, I'd packed away my Nikon and the rolls of film. Every time I saw a camera, I thought about the way that man had stood in my hallway shadow, watching me like I was the one in the frame. Years later, I moved out, went to college, lived in apartments with locks you could open with a credit card. But I always checked the windows first, always kept the blinds closed, always made sure the back door was locked, then checked it again 15 minutes later. Some people say you grow out of fear. I think you just grow around it like a tree bending around a nail hammered into it years ago. The nail stays. You just learn how to keep living with it there. When something feels wrong, it usually is. People will tell you you're overreacting, that you're imagining things. But it's better to be the person who makes the call than the person who wishes they had. Trust your instincts, they're there to keep you alive. When you grow up in a place like Marion Hollow, you get used to the kind of quiet that city people find unnerving. There aren't any hums of traffic or echoes of sirens, just wind in the trees, the occasional scrape of a snowplow, and the crunch of boots on frozen ground. I'd lived there my whole life, though lived might be a generous word. The winters had a way of swallowing whole seasons, making months blur together in a white haze. After my parents' divorce, Dad and I settled into a rhythm. He worked for the county, clearing roads when storms rolled through, which meant a lot of nights alone for me in our drafty 2-story house. He trusted me to be independent, but that didn't mean I had free rein. In fact, I was still paying for skipping school the week before, grounded, stuck at home with nothing but old DVDs and my phone for company. It was one of those February nights when the snow made the air glow blue right before sunset. Dad had left around 4 to get ahead of the storm, and I'd spent the first couple hours curled on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me, half watching a movie I'd seen a dozen times. Around 6, the wind started rattling the loose railing on the porch, the sound carrying through the walls like someone shaking a chain-link fence. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Don't forget history project tomorrow. Oh, and lock your doors. People breaking into houses near Hollow Road Trail." That made me laugh. "No one cares enough to rob us," I typed back. The truth was, we didn't have much worth stealing. The TV was a hand-me-down from my uncle, my laptop had a cracked screen, and Dad's idea of valuables was a good set of wrenches. Still, after I hit send, I wandered through the house double-checking the locks. That's when I saw it. Faint, muddy smears on the kitchen linoleum. They were small, more like prints from work boots than sneakers. Dad never tracked in snow. He always left his boots in the mudroom. I bent down, touched one. Cold, damp. I told myself I'd probably done it earlier without noticing, but my chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. At 7:05, the landline rang. No one ever called it unless it was Dad or a telemarketer. "Kiddo," Dad's voice said. "How's the storm looking there?" Hey, relieved, I started telling him about the wind and the footprints, but he cut me off sharply. "I never called you. I'm still out plowing. Don't answer the door. I'm on my way." Wait, the line went dead before I could speak. The caller ID had read, Eric J. Dad saved contact. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear long after the dial tone faded, listening to the house breathe in the wind. The knock came 13 minutes later. It wasn't at the front door, the one with the glass pane and the porch light above it. It was at the side door, half hidden from the road and almost never used. It was a light knock, uncertain, like the person wasn't sure they wanted me to answer. I stayed in the living room, my fingers tightening around Dad's old baseball bat. The knock came again, slower this time. Then nothing. For a while, the only sound was the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. Then I heard something upstairs, the metallic slide of a drawer opening. Not slamming, not rummaging, just opening. There shouldn't have been anyone upstairs. I called Sarah. "If I hang up, call the police," I whispered. She asked what was going on, but I muted the phone and started up the stairs, moving slow, my bare feet cold against the wood. Halfway up, I could see my bedroom door standing wide open. I always closed it before going downstairs. A shadow shifted across the doorway. Before I could turn, a man's voice floated out, quiet but deliberate. "Why'd you hang up earlier?" I didn't answer. I ran. Down the stairs, through the front hall, fumbling with the deadbolt before yanking the door open and bolting into the snow. The cold bit into my feet, but I didn't stop until I was halfway to the neighbor's yard. By the time the police arrived, less than 4 minutes later, the house was empty. No footprints except mine in the fresh snow. No sign of the man. But they did find my phone's settings had been tampered with. The earlier call, the one that sounded like Dad, the caller ID had been manually changed. That meant whoever it was had been inside the house before I even picked up the phone. The police worked the house for over an hour, their boots leaving wet trails across the floor. I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, answering their questions in short bursts because every time I spoke, I imagined that man's voice answering back from upstairs. One officer, a younger guy with close-cropped hair, asked me to walk him through it again. I told him about the call, the knock, the drawer, the shadow. I told him how the voice had sounded. Calm, almost casual. "Could it have been a friend playing a prank?" he asked. I almost laughed. Break in just to scare me. None of my friends know how to hack a caller ID, and none of them would. They didn't find any sign of forced entry, but that didn't mean much. Our side door's lock was old. The key stuck half the time. Whoever it was could have picked it easily. Dad got home while they were still there. His county plow truck was parked at an angle in the driveway, hazard lights cutting through the falling snow. He came in, cheeks red from the cold, eyes scanning the room like he was ready to fight whoever had been inside. "You okay?" he asked, and I could tell he was forcing his voice to sound calm. "I'm fine," I said, though my hands were still shaking under the blanket. The officers explained the caller ID thing. Dad's jaw tightened. So you're telling me someone was in here long enough to mess with her phone, then hung around upstairs until she caught on? That's what it sounds like, the older officer said. They advised us to replace our locks, check our windows, maybe install an alarm system. Then they left, their tire tracks filling with snow before the tail lights disappeared. Dad stayed up the rest of the night. He didn't say it, but I knew he was listening for the same things I was. The creak of the floorboards, the rattle of the porch railing, the sound of someone moving where they shouldn't be. The next morning, we replaced the locks on every door. Dad even screwed a wooden dowel into the frame of the side door so it couldn't be opened from the outside at all. Still, the house felt thinner somehow, like whatever barrier had been keeping the outside world from getting in had been cracked, and now everything, cold, wind, strangers, could slip through. That night I slept in the living room with the TV on low. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that open doorway upstairs, that shadow moving across it. And always, that voice. Why'd you hang up earlier? 2 days later, the police called with an update, or what they called an update. No one in the area had reported seeing a stranger near the house. None of the neighbors had noticed anything unusual, though Mrs. Klein next door mentioned she'd heard a knock on her back door the same night just before 8. She hadn't answered it. Dad didn't like that. Means they were still in the neighborhood after you ran out, he muttered. We kept the curtains closed after that. Even in the daytime, I didn't like the idea of someone being able to see in. Sarah came over once, but she kept glancing at the staircase like she expected someone to come down it. The worst part was the phone. I couldn't bring myself to answer it. Even when it was just Dad calling from work, I let it ring until the voicemail picked up, then called him back. I didn't want to hear that voice again, even if I knew it wasn't real. One evening, about a week after it happened, Dad found me sitting on the couch with all the lights on. You can't live like this forever, he said. I know. He sat down next to me, resting his elbows on his knees. Look, I've been thinking, maybe we should move. Somewhere closer to town. Less space for someone to sneak around without being noticed. I wanted to say yes right away, but something in me resisted. Marion Hollow was home for better or worse. Moving wouldn't erase what happened. It would just change the view from the window. We didn't move, but we did start locking the doors even when we were both home. Dad bought a motion sensor light for the side door and a cheap camera that sent video to his phone. I knew it wouldn't stop someone determined to get in, but it felt like putting up a wall, even if it was just a thin one. Still, some nights, I woke to the sound of knocking. I'd lie there in the dark, my heart racing until I convinced myself it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew the truth. The real danger wasn't outside anymore. It had already been in the house. The weeks turned into months. The snow melted and spring nudged its way into Marion Hollow, but the chill inside me stayed. I tried to get back to normal. School, friends, even my part-time job at the local grocery store. But something had shifted. I stopped feeling safe in my own home. Dad noticed too. One evening as we sat eating dinner, he said, distant, I know what happened. Shook you. You're quieter than usual. More, I nodded, swallowing hard. I keep thinking about that night. About how close it was. About how that guy, whoever he was, could have been in my room, watching me. He put down his fork and reached across the table. Be scared. You don't have to pretend you're not. We can't let this control us. But it's okay to his words helped, but only a little. I started carrying pepper spray in my backpack and sleeping with the bedroom door locked, even when Dad was home. At night, I kept the TV or a podcast playing, anything to drown out the silence and the memories. Months later, Dad and I installed a security system. Cameras, motion sensors, alarms, the works. It was expensive, and sometimes the alarms went off for no reason, but I felt a little safer. Still, the experience changed me. I learned that sometimes danger doesn't come crashing through the front door. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, disguised as a phone call or a quiet knock. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought inside your own home and your own head. Most importantly, I learned that fear isn't weakness. It's a signal, a warning to be vigilant, to protect yourself, and to never ignore the small things that don't feel right. Today I'm older and I'm stronger. But when I see an open door or hear a knock in the dark, I remember that night. I remember how close I came to losing everything, and how important it is to listen to that quiet voice inside that says, "Be careful." Because sometimes that's what keeps you alive. Trust your instincts. Fear is not the enemy. Ignoring it is. When something feels wrong, act on it. Protect your space, your peace, and never underestimate the strength it takes to face what scares you most. I was 15 when it happened, and though I've tried to forget parts of that night, it's one I'll carry with me forever. I grew up in Ashford, Maine, a quiet harbor town where the boats bobbed gently in the docks, and the smell of salt water mixed with the faint scent of gasoline. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business, but somehow the nights always felt peaceful. At least that's what I thought. My parents had split when I was 11, and I lived with my mom in a small weathered house at the end of a dead-end street. The kind of neighborhood where streetlights flickered on uneven poles and leaves rustled in the summer breeze, but where a kid could ride a bike down the block without much worry. My mom worked 2 jobs, mostly at the diner on Main Street, so I got used to being home alone, especially in the summer when school was out and the nights stretched long and lazy. That July was unusually hot, sticky even for Maine, and the summer felt endless. I'd spend most evenings sketching in my art journal, my window cracked open to let the salty air in while the boats made their soft clinks at the harbor down the road. It was the perfect way to unwind after a day spent helping out at the diner or wandering the town with friends. But lately, the quiet felt different. Earlier that month, the local news ran a story about prowlers caught sneaking around houses late at night. The footage wasn't clear, just dark silhouettes shifting near backyard windows, but it was enough to unsettle the neighborhood. My mom dismissed it, saying it was probably kids messing around, but I couldn't shake the unease. The day my mom had to work a double shift, she reminded me as she left, "Lock the door behind me and don't leave your art stuff all over the couch. I'll be back before midnight." I smiled, waving her off. "You got it. I'll be fine." She kissed the top of my head and closed the door behind her. Alone, I settled on the couch with my journal, the faint hum of a ceiling fan overhead, the room bathed in the golden glow of a late summer evening. I didn't realize that night would change the way I saw my home forever. The hours passed slowly. I was lost in my sketches, boats, harbors, the cracked wood of docks. The breeze blew through the slightly open windows, lifting the curtains in gentle waves. Somewhere, a seagull cried out, sharp and distant. Around 8:40 p.m., I heard it, soft, metallic, a click. It wasn't loud, just enough to make me stop mid-sketch. My heart gave a little jump. "Probably just the bathroom window," I muttered to myself. The wind had been picking up earlier, and I figured the latch must have popped open. I texted my friend Luke, trying to lighten the mood. Me. "Think the wind popped my window open." Luke. "Or a seagull broke in. Wear a helmet." I laughed quietly and went upstairs to check. My room was at the end of the hall, past the bathroom, and I could hear the faint hum of the streetlight outside filtering through the window. When I pulled back the curtain, my stomach dropped. The window was open wider than I had ever left it. The sash tilted, the cool night air rushing in. My fingers trembled as I reached for the latch. It was flipped down. The window had been unlocked. I locked it back with a click and closed the curtains fast, trying to shake the feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe someone had been around earlier and forgotten to close it properly. Maybe the latch had loosened on its own. I tried to tell myself all these things. Back downstairs, I tried to focus on my drawing, but the silence felt heavier. The shadows around the room seemed thicker, darker. Then about 10 minutes later I heard it. The kitchen door handle jiggling softly, the scrape of metal against metal. Not a forceful shake, but a deliberate test. My breath caught. My phone buzzed, Mom calling. Relief flooded me. "Hey, Mom," I whispered. Silence. Then a voice. Not hers. A man's. "You shouldn't have closed the window." I dropped the phone, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Without thinking, I bolted for the front door. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers slick with sweat. The door wouldn't unlock fast enough, my whole body shook. I could hear movement, soft footsteps maybe, somewhere just beyond the walls of the house. Finally, the bolt slid back, and I threw the door open, stumbling into the warm night air. I ran barefoot across the porch, down the cracked steps, and pounded on my neighbor's door. "Mrs. Whitman, please," I cried, banging hard. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. Her eyes widened and she pulled me inside without a word, locking the door behind me. She called the police immediately. I sat on her couch, trembling, trying to steady my breathing. Outside, the world seemed oblivious. Crickets chirping, a dog barking in the distance, but I knew I was no longer safe in my own home. When the police arrived, they were calm but serious. They went through the house with flashlights, checking every window and door. Outside, they found muddy footprints on the roof above my bedroom window. Somebody had climbed up the trellis, slipped the latch earlier in the day, and waited for nightfall to come back. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The next week was a blur of police reports and repairs. Mom installed bars on all the windows, changed locks, and bought a security system. The house felt less like home and more like a fortress. I didn't sleep well. Every noise startled me. The creak of a floorboard, the whistle of the wind through the cracks. I kept my curtains drawn tightly and my phone close at hand. Even during the day, I felt watched, as if eyes lurked just outside the frame of my vision. My sketches suffered. My art journal, once a source of comfort, now felt like a reminder of what had happened. Some nights when I tried to draw, my hand would freeze mid-stroke, imagining the shadowy figure on my roof, the man who had come so close. Mom tried to reassure me. Everything they can. "You're safe now. It was just one person, and the police are doing." But it wasn't that simple. I wasn't safe. Not really. Years later, I still live with the memory of that night. I'm older now, moved out on my own, but I never leave my curtains open after dark. Sometimes, when I'm sketching in the quiet of night, I hear that faint metallic click, the sound of a latch being released, and my hand freezes, pencil hovering over the page. I've learned that safety isn't just about locks and bars. It's about awareness, trust in your instincts, and never taking your security for granted. That night taught me something important. Danger doesn't always come with a shout or a forced entry. Sometimes it slips in quietly, through an unlocked window or a moment of carelessness. You can't always see the threat, but you can prepare for it. Safety is a responsibility we share every day, whether we live alone or with others. It teaches the importance of vigilance, trusting our instincts, and taking simple precautions seriously. Most importantly, it shows that even when fear tries to control us, courage and preparedness are what keep us safe. I was 13 the autumn the rain really started to settle in Oregon. Fairview was one of those small towns that felt like it existed mostly to hold its breath until summer, when tourists came through on their way to the coast or the mountains. The rest of the year, it was a quiet place where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. My little brother Ethan had just turned 10 that year. We shared a room in our 2-story rental at the edge of town, the kind of place that creaked in the wind and smelled like damp wood. The woods behind the house stretched thick and dark, swallowing the weak light of the street lamps, and I hated how the shadows gathered there like they belonged to something watching. Mom worked evenings at the grocery store, pulling shifts that kept her gone past bedtime. Dad hadn't been around for years, so it was just us. We kept things simple: school, homework, and the small escape of our weekend rituals. That Friday night was special. Ethan and I had cooked up a secret plan, pizza night in the living room, just us and the movies. We built a blanket fort between the couch and the TV, draping sheets and pillows over the furniture to make a little hideout where the rain's pounding wouldn't reach us. The house smelled like frozen pepperoni and melted cheese. By 7:20 p.m., we were halfway through our first movie when the landline rang. It was rare for that phone to ring these days. Ethan was shoving a slice into his mouth and looked at me with a mouthful. "Can you get it?" I pulled myself out of the fort and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, just a pause, and then a man's voice, low, calm, and weirdly casual. "Is your mother home?" My stomach flipped. "Who is this?" He chuckled softly, like he was amused. "Tell her I'll be by soon." I hung up fast, heart pounding in my ears. Ethan's eyes were wide. "Who was that?" "Wrong number," I said, but my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. I didn't tell Ethan what I really thought, how my skin prickled, how the warmth of our fort suddenly felt fragile, like a thin shield against something cold. The rain had started in earnest by 8:10 p.m., tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. We were back on the couch, blankets wrapped tight around us, when I noticed the basement light flicker on. Our basement was dark and musty, lit only by a single pull-cord bulb that Mom hated to leave on because of the electric bill. The light buzzing was usually rare enough to be noticeable. "Did you turn the basement light on?" I asked Ethan. He wrinkled his nose. "No way, I don't go down there. Spiders." I laughed, trying to keep things light, but the light flicked off, and then on again, like a heartbeat in the dark. The house felt too quiet after that. Even the rain seemed to slow down outside, as if waiting for something. Around 8:30 p.m., the phone rang again. This time, Ethan nudged me. "Mom?" I grabbed the receiver, voice shaky. "Hello?" The same voice from before, smoother now, colder. "Tell your brother to come to the basement." I slammed the phone down before I could answer, forcing a smile at Ethan. "Creep messing with us." Probably just some... But my hands shook and I couldn't stop glancing toward the basement door. We locked the basement door tight, double-checked it. I grabbed Mom's old softball bat from the hall closet, the one she kept by the front door for, just in case. Ethan and I huddled in the living room, the blanket fort forgotten, the movies paused on the screen. Then, 10 minutes later, came the knocks. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the basement door. "Please tell me you heard that," Ethan whispered, eyes wide. I nodded, my grip tightening on the bat. "We're going next door. Now." We slipped on our shoes, hearts racing, and darted through the rain to the Jenkins house a few doors down. Mrs. Jenkins was kind and always kept fresh cookies in her jar. She let us in right away, eyes concerned as Ethan and I spilled out what happened. She called the police, who arrived quickly, searching the house with flashlights and careful eyes. The officers found muddy footprints in the basement, wet marks leading from the storm cellar door to the foot of the stairs. The cellar door was outside, a heavy wooden trapdoor hidden behind a row of bushes. Someone had pried it open and slipped inside, waiting. The idea made my skin crawl. Whoever it was, they had been inside our house while we were just feet away. The officers reassured us as best they could. Outside cellar door was definitely tampered with. "No signs of forced entry inside," one said. But the mom came home late that night, pale and worried. She replaced the basement lock the next day, installed extra security, and made sure the basement light stayed off. Ethan wouldn't sleep downstairs after that, and I couldn't blame him. Years later, I still remember that night vividly. Every time I see a pull-cord light bulb, I'm transported back to that basement. The dark, the soft knocking, the sound of rain outside. It wasn't just a scary night. It was a lesson about safety, about trusting your instincts when something feels off. We learned that threats don't always announce themselves with loud crashes or shouting. Sometimes they come quietly, slipping through cracks and shadows, and you have to be ready. The basement light taught me that fear can live in the smallest details, and that caution is a form of strength. Safety isn't guaranteed, but it can be protected through vigilance, trust in our instincts, and taking simple precautions seriously. It reminds us that fear is natural, but it doesn't have to control us. By facing our fears with preparedness and awareness, we can keep ourselves and those we love safe, even when danger hides in the quietest places. I didn't expect much when Mom asked me to head out to Uncle Ray's old farmhouse in Pine Hollow, Missouri. I was 17, just finishing up summer before my senior year. Mom was busy selling the place, and she wanted me to clear out whatever personal stuff was left before the realtor showed up. I figured it would be a quiet week, just me, the house, and the overgrown fields. Pine Hollow was the kind of place where you heard everything: the buzz of cicadas, the distant drone of pickup trucks, and the rustling of corn stalks in the breeze. The house sat at the end of a gravel road with neighbors a good quarter-mile away, so it was about as isolated as a place could get without being truly remote. Uncle Ray was a character, a true countryman who believed in old stories and whispered warnings. "Don't go out there at night," he told me when I visited last summer. "You won't see 'em, but they'll see you." I laughed it off at the time, just his way of keeping me inside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something eerie about that wide field behind the house, especially as the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened. A few days before Mom sent me out, I found the back gate wide open. At first I blamed the wind or maybe a deer wandering through, but the thought kept nagging at me. Why would the gate just swing open like that? That Sunday, August 14th, started hot and humid, the kind of day where the sweat sticks no matter how much you wipe it off. Mom called me late in the afternoon just before she left for the city. "You sure you're okay out there by yourself tonight?" she asked, her voice full of worry. "I'm fine," I said, glancing at the field glowing orange in the late light. Uncle Ray's tools. "Just boxing up some of—" "All right, just lock the doors. The realtor's coming tomorrow morning." She sounded tired, maybe a little distracted. After dinner, I settled into the creaky old armchair in the living room with a paperback and a mug of iced tea. The house smelled like dust and aged wood, and the sounds of crickets and frogs seeped in through the open window. Around 8:20 p.m., the gravel driveway crunched softly under footsteps. I peeked through the front curtains, expecting to see a car or someone coming home. But there was nothing, just the empty shimmer of heat hanging in the air, the field stretching wide and still. At 9 p.m., the night grew quieter, the crickets stopped chirping, and the only sound was the rustling of the corn stalks, which suddenly felt alive with something unseen. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the far edge of the cornfield, where the rows ended and the wild grass began. The figure didn't move, just stood with his arms at his sides, facing the house. At first I thought it was a scarecrow, old and forgotten, but when I locked the back door and looked again, he had moved closer. Now he stood beside the wooden fence, his gaze fixed in my direction. I felt a chill despite the thick Missouri heat. I pulled my phone out, hoping for a call or a text to distract me. Instead, it buzzed with an unknown number. Hesitating, I answered. A calm, male voice said, "You left the back gate open again." My throat tightened. "Who is this?" "You should check your basement," he said, and then the line went dead. My heart pounded, and I locked every door and window with trembling hands. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and slowly crept toward the basement stairs. The basement smelled like damp earth and musty wood, colder than the rest of the house. I swept the flashlight beam across the cluttered shelves and boxes. Near the storm cellar hatch in the far corner, I saw it. Fresh, muddy boot prints pressed into the concrete floor. They led toward the stairs. I swallowed hard and bolted upstairs, grabbing my keys and throwing on my jacket. I told myself I was overreacting, but every hair on my neck stood on end. I drove down the gravel road to the nearest gas station, the one with the flickering neon sign, and waited. The county sheriff arrived soon after, a tall man with a calm, serious face. We drove back together. The field was empty, no sign of the figure. But when the sheriff pointed out the footprints circling the house, My stomach dropped. The footprints weren't just coming toward the house. They circled it more than once, as if whoever it was had been watching me for a long time. The sheriff tightened the locks and promised increased patrols. I didn't spend another night at that farmhouse. The realtor sold it quickly after that, and I moved back home. Even now, years later, whenever I pass an open field, I can't help scanning the edges, looking for a still figure watching in the shadows. That summer taught me something about fear and silence, about how some dangers don't shout. They wait quietly. Vigilance is key, especially when we feel alone or vulnerable. Danger can come from the quietest places and in the calmest voices. Trust your instincts, respect your boundaries, and never ignore the small signs that something is wrong. Safety comes not just from locks and lights, but from awareness, preparedness, and listening to the quiet warnings before it's too late.